Welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview. This is a show where we take a look at what's coming to this week's edition of the North Coast Journal. I am your host, Tanya Shrum. We are joined by North Coast Journal's Arts and Features editor, Jennifer Fumiko Cahill, and our California local journalism fellow, Kelby McIntosh. How are you both doing today?
Doing okay. Happy Juneteenth, everyone.
Happy Juneteenth. And I'm really excited, even though I wish we were all off work. I'm still very excited to be with you today. And we have a lot of great content coming in this week's journal. Jennifer, why don't you go ahead and tell us what's coming to this week's edition of the North Coast Journal on the cover?
Well, you may have noticed from the cover, the very, very subtle cover, that it is in fact Restaurant Week, which is like Burger Week and Taco Week, except we have given restaurants free rein to do what they like with specials that are special. They are special in the sense that they are only for this 10-day thing. And mind you, this is, again, just like those other events, a marketing product. So the editorial department doesn't really know anything about it until it goes to press, and we're like maybe proofreading times and dates. But it's a very fun lineup, including a lot of diners, which I just want to say that shout out to diners in Humboldt County, because without diners, I don't know where restless teens go to waste time. Also, we have South G Kitchen, Sammy's Barbecue. Who else is on there? We've got, let me see, I have to look. Bella Italia and a bunch of other places that are all going to be doing specials that are maybe a little Double D Steakhouse, maybe a little bit cheaper, a little bit different than they would normally do. And it's just kind of a fun limited time excuse to go out and eat at our local restaurants, because I'll tell you what, the fast food chains are going to be there, I promise. And so is the pizza frozen in your fridge. It'll be there in a week. But these are only for the next 10 days. So it's just an excuse, like I said, to go out and enjoy our local restaurants.
And a good reason to try something maybe you've been meaning to try. And then you're going to find your new favorite spot.
I noticed that, like I said, we don't know what's going to be in them until they go to press and we're looking at them on the page. But Double D's Steakhouse has like a lobster special. And I was like, is lobster having a moment? Because we're going to talk lobster when we get to Oyster Fest.
Oh, well, maybe it's time to talk about the sunburn, talk about the return to the Oyster Fest I remember.
Yeah, this year's Oyster Fest was kind of a, post-lockdown. We had our remote Oyster Fests. We had our shrunken Oyster Fests. We've had Oyster Fests with the snow fence, but this is Oyster Fest, very old-fashioned style, just tons of people on the plaza on a beautiful summer day with bands playing and, music all day, people picnicking and people catching up and just like shooting the breeze, waiting forever for beer. That is what Oyster Fest is for. And this year I got to cover the judging of Best Oyster, which, and I should say that if you want to see pictures of Oyster Fest, maybe you don't remember it all clearly, or maybe you missed it, go to northcoastjournal.com, and Aoife Maloney's photos, some of which are in the paper, the full slideshow is going to be online for you. And they're great, and they're just very joyful, and it's just good to see everything back and fun again. But I was back at the former home of the judging of Oyster Fest, the former Mazzotti's, which is no longer Mazzotti's. The words Italian restaurant are still on the door, but all the signage and everything is gone. And I may or may not have seen some plans for renovation. Yeah, it's very exciting. So of course now it's under new ownership and everything, and it's going to come out as a new business. But it used to be where all the judging happened for Oyster Fest, and it was again this year. So on that big table by the big window up front, there's a big long table covered in platters of oysters. This year, Jessica Silva, whom you may recognize from journal stories, usually about food, sometimes about cannabis and food, she was kind of running the controlled chaos of judging Oyster Fest, which means she had, what is it, like 10, 11 judges and a stream of people bringing in their oysters for judging. Some of them were real simple on a tray on, foil, just like broiled oysters with some sauce on top of them. And then some of them were elaborate spreads on top of, say, a slab of redwood covered in rock salt. You just don't know. It could go either way. And it was really interesting. A few years ago, I wrote about how the number of people competing in Oyster Fest was really shrinking. And as were the number of people selling oysters on the plaza. This year, there were somewhere around a half a dozen booths selling oysters, Eureka High Cheer, and then a few restaurants, etc. But what changed in the competition was at some point during the pandemic, for example, during lockdown, they became more desperate for entrants, right? They were like, oh man, we got to get some people on here. And so in a sort of a big radical change, they allowed home cooks to compete. So you did not need to be a restaurant. You did not need to be selling on the plaza, which used to be the hard and fast rule. You could be an individual who can just really cook oysters or make wonderful sauces for raw oysters. And so that changed. And we've had already a, technically, I guess you would say an amateur winner. David Orluck has won in the past, and we've seen a lot of showings from individual chefs. And this year, all three winners, because two of them won 2 titles each, are people who you can only eat their food at like pop-ups or events. So while there were some restaurants on board, 511 was still there, A Taste of Bim was still there. By the way, shout out to 511's Sunamono oyster. That thing was delicious. And if I had my druthers, I'm just saying. Also, Taste of Bim, their hot sauce on that oyster, so good. So good. It just felt like you were at the beach. Fantastic. But we were missing Tomo. We were missing Sushi Spot. We were missing Blue Lake Casino. Those are places that typically swept the competition in past years. So we got a real different set of contestants, a different set of judges, and we're off. This year, David Orluck once again scored, won a pair of distinctions, one being Best Hot Oyster and the other being Best Oyster overall, both with his hot Korean barbecue oyster, which was a grilled oyster with a little bit of bulgogi on top of it, so that seasoned marinated Korean beef, Korean style beef, a Korean barbecue marinade, pickled carrots, green onion, and a little bit of kimchi. So it was big flavor, lots of sweet and spicy and tart and tangy, all those things happening on the oyster. It was not so much about the briny, beachy taste of oyster, more about these big flavors that are really kind of trending right now. And when I talk to him, he does occasionally pop-ups at Septentrio, and he's actually done this oyster there before. So if you want to try the winning oyster, that's where to find it. You're ready. And without a line, right? No line, or maybe some line. Anyway, the next was May Siricharan, who is, this is sort of interesting. She's having a moment. You may recall that she was involved in the St. Vincent de Paul fundraiser, and she actually cooks for folks at the St. Vincent de Paul free dining facility, which serves just thousands and thousands of people who are in having food insecurity. She cooks there, and she makes, like 100-gallon servings of soup at a time and things like that. But she also makes a mean oyster. So she recently started a stand, which you can find at the Friday night market, called Tasty Tiger, Thaiger. See what she did there? Little Thai pun. Anyway, she is from Thailand, and a recent trip to Thailand inspired her cold dishes, which included a lemongrass and basil oyster, which won her best cold and also best presentation because it was so very, very pretty. So I don't know that she'll have the oysters, but she is an incredible, incredible chef. She also has been on Chopped. I have to go back and watch that episode because I need to see what happened there. And then finally, best local oyster, or best use of local ingredients, I should say, went to Mainly Lobster. Maine, M-A-I-N-E. Yeah, we're really bringing the puns this year. Mainly Lobster literally ships lobsters from Maine, but he also used plenty of local ingredients, including maybe the coolest deployment of a local ingredient, which was the pearlization, like making a little gelatin sphere. We're doing, chemistry, cooking, gastroscience. A little bubble, a little boba pearl of a Humboldt made hot sauce that I think it was called Humboldt Hotties. Is that right? So that when you ate the oyster, your first bite doesn't have hot sauce, but when the little pearl breaks, then the hot sauce comes in. And yes, it did have a little bit of lobster claw on it. So very fancy, very inventive things, but things done by individual chefs doing pop-ups and things like that, maybe having trucks in the future, etc., but not sit-down restaurants. So big changes, but a lot of fun.
I just have to say that it really was. I've been back in the area since 2020, and this really made me feel like it was back in full swing. So I hope everybody attended. I hope they have had a great time, and I encourage everybody to pick up this week's North Coast Journal, get those images, and relive the things that might have been buried in beer and wine. With that, we are going to shift to the news with Kelby McIntosh. And what do you have for us this week, sir?
More big changes, as always. That's the theme of today's episode, big changes. And speaking of big changes, in Norte County, just north of Plymouth, there's a stretch of the 101 called the Last Chance Grade, notoriously known for having landslides and trapping the people who can't make their way down to places for Oyster Fest and everything else. So to prevent those things, CalTran, the county, the native tribes, which is like a miracle that is unheard of, are actually all on the same page when it comes to fixing this road. CalTran was give the county two solutions on how they can fix, which was either to keep on patching the road, which is kind of questionable, or they could actually install a tunnel. And that is the leading solution that is been chosen for this project. Now, unfortunately, both projects are very expensive, but it will help in preventing more landslides and allow people to access the area without having to succumb to any danger or harm from that. They're looking to start construction in 2030. As well as they projected that by doing this, it will be at least another 8 years of road construction. But it will save so much more money on the long end, despite the upfront cost being so expensive. Landslides in this area have dated back to all the way to 1894 when wagons cut the trail in the beginning. So it has this kind of history that I thought was very interesting, but I also like the fact too that a solution is coming forth from this.
I agree. I think it's wonderful, and it is such a detriment to our economy when these roads are closed. But I have to admit, I find something romantic in the fact that during a really bad rain event, There's no way in or out. You
I
just
guess you
have
live
to
in
hunker
the,
down.
if you find that romantic, you really live in the right place, Tanya.
Absolutely. And that's coming from somebody that has not been able to get back into the county after flying home for the holidays.
Right.
So I've been there. I've been in Fort Bragg for the night, so I know. And we also have a follow-up story with Thad's penmanship. And would you like to tell us about that?
Oh, for sure. I thoroughly love this story. Me and Thad have had conversations about this before. So Eureka City Schools had a piece of property, the Jacobs Middle School property, which has its own kind of weird, unique story to it already. It was actually supposed to be the CHP headquarters at one point in time, but in some weird, mysterious way, before that can be finalized, the property was already sold. And with this selling of this property, normally there is a process that allows for the community to be more involved, to be vocal about how that process goes and everything else. But the process that was used actually threw the property into more of a property exchange with a third party group where it traded in a house and a couple of millions, a few $1 million actually. Overall, the price of everything totaled to $6 million. But within this, the court made it to the Humboldt grand jury. And the jury seemed, though they said that the school took haste action and how they handled this, it technically didn't violate anything, but broke the spirit of how these processes go. And though they said the school didn't technically do anything, Thad brought out in the article that he spoke to actual experts, and they say it kind of did break some laws. But that's neither here nor there. If you want the full scoop, you can actually read that story online. I'm not going to get into the weeds of that more than anything else, because, it's just not enough time.
He's been working diligently to bring us the unmasking of the Scooby-Doo villain, and the plot continues to thicken.
Oh, yes. It was Colonel Mustard in the library with the candlestick. For sure. But those are the two ones that have been very well put together, that has a lot of intricate language and verbiage that gets into the weeds about all the final details, not only with the roads, but also too with this Eureka school story as well. Both of them are really well thought out, put together, and factualized in a way that only these two journalists could do it, Kim and Thad. So big ups to them, and you can read both these stories on the website.
That's correct. Or, of course, you can pick up that paper copy that sometimes you just love the smell of newsprint, as I do.
I love it. You love newsprint and getting trapped by weather.
I'm just an old soul. Well, Kelby, you were so efficient. It looks like we do have time to cover the unfortunate but necessary article this week. Jennifer, would you like to fill us in on what happened?
Yeah, now taking applications for this year's top 10 Dick Moves.
Indeed.
Over the weekend, as you know, it's June, it's Pride Month. Flags are flying everywhere. Sorry, Mrs. Alito. So sorry for you. The pride flag that goes over the courthouse in Humboldt County. It's funny, the day before, I think it was like Friday or Saturday, I was driving on like H Street and I saw it and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot that they have a flag over the courthouse. And someone tore it down over the weekend and left it in tatters at the bottom of the flagpole. And so in response to this, Natalie Arroyo reached out to us. You may know her if you are in the Eureka area and you are in the Humboldt County 4th District. She is your supervisor. She wanted to talk about it. And, when she kind of like reached out and wanted to communicate something about the event, she said to me that she really wanted to not focus on despair and not, traumatize people by saying, hey, look, here's another person who hates you. It's awful. To constantly hear this onslaught of, hate speech and anti-LGBTQ garbage that's constantly flowing at us in the news can be so disheartening. And that's what it's meant to do, right? It's meant to let you know you're not welcome, you don't belong here, you should hide. It's meant to send all those messages. And what she really wanted to do was to counter that message. And so she contributed a views piece, which I really recommend everybody take a look at. And in it, she talks about why it's important that the pride flag flies over the Humboldt County Courthouse, why it was enshrined in law that we should be flying it during Pride Month. She talks about how to stand up for folks in your community. So if you are not an LGBTQ person, but you would like to be helpful and, counter some of the awfulness in the world, she has some advice on things you can do and places you can go, resources you can reach out to. And it's just a really lovely, I felt like it was a really a lovely piece to remind people that, these gestures, these symbols are important, but it's not only the vandalism or the anti messages that are important. It's also our smaller, maybe less visible gestures of community togetherness and support, and that we can counter these things. We shouldn't just kind of go, oh, shucks, that's terrible. But there are things we can do, ways to show support and ways to, make those gestures, those random and rude, awful, I shouldn't say random because sometimes it feels strategic, but those awful minority of angry voices do not have to be the loudest in the room.
Absolutely. And it's a wonderful article. It's a wonderful edition of the North Coast Journal, as it is every week.
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer, that wraps up our time. Kelby, thank you so much. I encourage not only everybody to pick up this current edition, but also participate in this week's Juneteenth celebration and education. Participate in Pride this month. Be inclusive instead of shelling yourself away like Tanya would with a book and the land slid down. But to end on a positive note, I want everybody to go to their newsstands and pick up this week's edition of the North Coast Journal or find it online at northcoastjournal.com. I am Tanya Schrum, and thanks for being with us and staying informed and supportive of our North Coast piece of paradise. Thanks, everyone.